Pastor Ed here with daily devotions for Wednesday, April the 24th, 2024. Talked a little more yesterday about the idea of passing the baton. Now, today and tomorrow, and then also Friday and Saturday, I want to get into the particular lessons, the readings that we had. First, that Acts 17 reading where Paul and Silas came to Thessalonica, where there was a synagogue of the Jews, and Paul went in, as was his custom. He talked with them. Now, I have a little bit of a problem there because what our NRSV says is that he argued with them from the scriptures. That's the translation. And then goes on to say, explaining and proving that it was necessary for the Messiah to suffer and rise from the dead. I don't know about you, but the idea of arguing, I think of some, dare I call them, self-righteous Christians who seem to know when they're going to argue with you about everything. If you look at other ways of translating the Greek words here, that word that argued in verse 2 could also be translated as reasoned with them, or discussed, held a discussion with them. And to me, that makes a lot more sense, that he talked with them, he reasoned with them, he discussed with them. And then verse 3, explaining's not too bad, but then proving, well, another way of translating that word explaining is that he opened up the scriptures, that he expounded, that he again explained. And then again, explained wasn't too bad, but proved. But another way the Greek word can be translated as setting before them or placed before them, not proving, but set before them, demonstrated for them, gave evidence for them. Again, to me, it sounds a lot less aggressive and much more, I don't know the word I'm looking for, but just more sensitive, more compassionate to the people that you're talking with. It's not we don't beat them over the head with the gospel, but we talk with them, we open their horizons, we explain things, we demonstrate for them. And it came across a story that I think is a perfect example of this. There was once a Christian who had a neighbor by the name of Jack. And this Jack was a tough man, worked hard, drank hard, fought hard. He was harsh and gruff. Most people were afraid of this Jack. But this one neighbor got brave, said hello to him over the fence one day and started a conversation with him, which admittedly was pretty one-sided at first. However, every chance he got, this neighbor would talk to Jack. He went over and visited him in his house. He'd sometimes even bring him a fresh loaf of homemade bread that his wife had made or a batch of cookies. He just tried to be neighborly and share the good things that he had with him, building a relationship. Well, one day the neighbor, who was a Christ follower, as I said, brought up the subject of heaven. He asked Jack if he believed in heaven. And first Jack said he didn't want to talk about religion, that was the end of the conversation. But a couple of years later, mind you, so you imagine in that time they continued to talk, maybe over the fence or they're in the yards across to each other, and maybe he would take bread over or cookies or whatever the case may be. A couple of years later, this Jack's son was killed in a boating accident. And this neighbor, the Christian, came over to tell Jack how sorry he was about the loss of his son. And overcome with grief, that rough, gruff, tough guy Jack just broke down and cried like a baby in front of his neighbor. Neighbor didn't quite know what to do at first, so he just put a hand on his shoulder and let him cry. And eventually Jack started talking. He said that his son was the only child he had and that he felt like he had failed him as a father. His son had tried to talk to him before about God and religion, but Jack told him what the religion was for people who were weak and who needed something to make them feel good about themselves. But Jack asked his neighbor, "Do you think my boy is in heaven right now?" And the neighbor replied, if he was trusting in Jesus for forgiveness, then he is certainly in heaven right now. And as Jack thought about that for a moment and says, I hope he sees his mother there too. And the neighbor said, Jack, there's no reason why he cannot one day see his father there too. And a few months later, this rough, tough Jack came over to his neighbor's house. He said, "I'm ready." "Ready for what?" asked the neighbor. "I'm ready to get right with God," he said. And they talked, and the neighbor was able to pray with Jack and help him begin a relationship. Um, the thing is, the neighbor had actually been praying for Jack for over 3 years, and was overcome with joy when he finally saw the answer to his prayers. It's not always going to be so dramatic, but I think that story is a good example of how we don't argue with people, we don't try to prove things to people, uh, but we build relationships with people. And it may take years, but then there may be that time when we can share the good news of Jesus Christ, and that could be everything in another person's life. Alrighty, we'll be back with you again tomorrow, talk a little bit more about Acts 17. Until then, take care. Bye.